This video we look at the ASML stock because in my opinion it's very interesting right now because we see we from all-time high to the level we are now we have a decrease from 35%, and in this point maybe ASML as a foundry could be interesting because we see we have restrictions in EU and in US government, and maybe then it's an interesting company to invest. And first of all, we should look at the valuation we have. So we have a PE ratio from 39 and a 5 years average from 44. And the average of the last 5 years is very interesting because of the price in the future of ASML. And we have, for example, a PEG ratio from 1.59. It's a little bit overvalued then, but it's not so interesting to look at these because we have at revenue and EBITDA, so a stagflation at the moment. And when we look to the growth, we see at revenue minus 1%. For example, the problem in the China market, we look at the future. So also we have an EBITDA from minus 6, but we have an EBIT growth forwarded from analyst estimates from 26% for the next year. And first of all, we should start with the basics. So ASML is very relevant because of the foundry. So for example, NVIDIA as a designer has to use the chips, for example, from TSMC, from Samsung, or from Intel or ASML. And ASML as standard in EU has the advantage that they have restrictions, for example, from the US government. And for example, if we have a war between Taiwan and China, they have the potential to use chips, for example, from ASML, and so their revenue could increase. On the other side, we have problems with China, and China is very important right now for ASML because most of the revenue, for example 70%, come from the Asian market, and this could be a problem if, for example, the US government or the EU brings new export controls or restrictions. And right now we have this problem, and we had too early published earnings and bad earnings in this case, and this wasn't so well for ASML. And when we look to the revenue sales breakdown, we see that 49% comes from China, and then 11% from Taiwan and 28% from South Korea. And so the most revenue comes from the Asian market, and then we have to look closer to these if we have, for example, restriction in these markets. On the other hand, we should maybe look at the forecast for 2030. We have here a revenue forecast from 30 billion until 60 billion, depends on the China market. Then we have gross margin between 56 and 6%. For example, Q3 outlook for outlook is right now at around about 51%, and the net margin should grow like the last year's then. And a big problem could be the actual revenue growth we had in the last year, and the question is how the revenue will expand in the next year. And here we have, for example, a forecast from 30 billion until around about 35 billion for 2025, and we have lower costs right now. The most interesting part in my opinion is the actual PE ratio, because here we see the historical PE from ASML, and we had in the last years 43 as average. And if we look for the 25 year earnings per share forecast, we have $31. And if we take, for example, 40 average as PE ratio, so under the 34 we had in the last years, we would have a stock price around about $1,260. And if you look to the historical, it could be much higher or lower, but I think with a 40 average we are here at the bottom line, and then we could look at the increase of the stock we could have, and that would be around 40%. On the other hand, we can look to the actual P ratio from peers, and there we see that, for example, NVIDIA has a little higher PE for the next year forecast. But on the other hand, we see we have here a lot of more growth in the past. For example, ASML had only the decrease from minus 1% in the last year. And on the other hand, we see that the growth estimate for the next year is a lot better. And this depends on the diversification maybe you want to do in the chip industry, and then could be ASML be an interesting company. So write in the comments if you invest in ASML. I think it could be an interesting company for a chip foundry in Europe. And thanks for watching this video.